Alright, now we're going to go to the distal end of the humerus. We did the proximal humerus last time. If you look at the front at the distal end of the humerus, this is an anterior view. We have on both sides, we have a medial and a lateral epicondyle. And then we have a round, sort of round looking piece, and that's the capitulum. And one that looks like a pulley, and that's known as the trochlea. In the front, we have the coronoid fossa, and a little bit lateral, we have the radial fossa. That's how we know those two are, that's the front of the humerus, because we have two fossas, even though the radial fossa is very shallow. When we turn it around, we can see a big, prominent olecranon fossa. When we now take a ulna and articulate it with the humerus, it's not the same one, but it's pretty close. It fits nicely into the trochlea. So on the ulna, the space that fits into the trochlea will be called the trochlear notch. The anterior lip of the trochlear notch that will fit into the coronoid fossa is known as the coronoid process. And the back of the elbow, that is actually our elbow proper, that we lay on or we hold ourselves up with, that's the Olecranon process, and the Olecranon process fits into the Olecranon fossa. So we have the Olecranon process, we have the trochlear notch, and we have the coronoid process. We take a radius together with us. We also see what we can create, and that's a radial notch. And that's right in here, this surface right in here. A radial head fits in here. And then we got a little roughened area just below the coronoid process, and that is known as the ulnar tuberosity. That's an attachment site and insertion for the brachialis muscle. Let's look at the radius now. We have a head of the radius, that's the round structure right here, and then we have a neck, which is usually more narrow, and it followed by a radial tuberosity, and that's the place where the biceps brachii inserts into the radius. When we follow that inferior or distally, the biggest piece we have here is the styloid process. The radius runs thumb side. The ulna runs pinky side. The carpals making up the wrist are 8 bones, rows of 2. We have a proximal row, we have a distal row. In the proximal row, when we start with the thumb side, this is the thumb side, we have the big bone in the proximal row, that's the scaphoid, formerly also known as head naviculum. And then, but we don't have to concern ourselves with that. And then the next bone over looks a little bit like a half moon shape, and that's the lunate. Bone. And then we have a bone that looks sort of triangular right here. If I see it. Alright, if I look at a different model, I see it right here. Sort of a triangle shaped bone. Sitting on top of the triquetrum, which this is the triquetrum, is the pisiform. We have scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, pisiform. We start in the distal row. The first bone that articulates with the thumb is the trapezium, followed by the trapezoid, that then articulates with these are metacarpals. Trapezium articulates with metacarpal 1, trapezoid with metacarpal 2, and then we got a big bone, and that's the capitate. That articulates with the middle finger, the metacarpal number 3. Followed lastly by the hamate. There's a hook on the hamate. That's how we know that bone. And it articulates with metacarpal 4 and 5. Distally to the metacarpals, we have the phalanges. Here are the metacarpals. Here are the phalanges. We have 2 phalanges, a proximal and a distal, on the thumb, and everybody else has 3, a proximal, a middle, and a distal. Good. When we go for the muscles, I'm going to do the muscles of the forearm for a moment. Most of them start at the medial epicondyle of the humerus. So you can see I'm moving forward on the front of the forearm. We have 4 of them that I want to focus on right now. One right here, one going down here, one in the middle, and one on the outside. The way I see that is I take my 4 fingers and I kind of lay them on that area. I can do that in my own arm, and I lay them on my area like that. So that gives me more or less an understanding where those fibers run. The first of those muscles is known as the Pronator Teres muscle, and it starts at the medial epicondyle of the humerus and it goes into the radius. It pronates the forearm. So it does this to the forearm. It pulls the radius over. We have another smaller one here that is not that easy to see in front. It's called the Prolater Quadratus, and it's like a quadrant sort of muscle. It starts from the distal ulna and goes into the distal radius, and it helps bring the arm over and rotate the radius over the ulna, as we can see right here. The radius, when we pronate, will cross over the ulna, and that's pronation. And then we have a muscle that is the supinator muscle, and the supinator muscle starts at the lateral ulna up here and wraps around and attaches onto the posterior proximal radius. So when the hand is pronated, it can pull and it supinates. And now let's go back to the other muscles, the other 3 muscles. The 1, 2, 3. Those are muscles that move the carpals. The one on the thumb side runs on the radial side, so that's name is flexor carpi radialis. And then we got a long one that goes into the palm of the hand, and that's called the Palmaris Longus. And then on the outside we got one that's kind of like the radialis, but it's called flexor carpi ulnaris. They, as far as I'm concerned, for this beginning class, they all start at the medial epicondyle, and they feed into the wrist on the radial side, on the ulnar side, or into the palmar fascia and the flexor retinaculum for the Palmaris Longus. Now we turn the arm over and look at the outer side of the arm. The first muscle we already looked at, which was the Brachioradialis. Most of those muscles start at the lateral epicondyle and move distally into the wrist. We have the Brachioradialis as our starting point, and then the one that's right next to the Brachioradialis is that there's actually 2 muscles that feed there. The Extensor Carpi radialis longus and brevis. As far as I'm concerned, they're right here. And then we get a muscle that's called the Extensor Digitorum, and that's right here on top. We haven't talked about that much yet in class, but we will next time because that muscle extends the fingers. And then on the ulnar side, guess what we have? We have an Extensor Carpi Ulnaris. Generally speaking, those muscles they originate at the lateral epicondyle of the humerus, and they insert at the wrist the radialis at the thumb side, the ulnaris at the pinky side. And the flexor digitorum, extensor digitorum, goes into the fingers, into the phalanx.